Yontiv, Shana Tova, everyone. Chag Sameach, Gemar Tov. Yomer, Tzalachti Kidvarecha. And God said, I have pardoned as you asked. For the last 2 years of my high school, my parents were living in a very rural area in France, and I went to a boarding school in England in the Midlands. And it was, as you can imagine, we say now, Harry Potter-like. We had ties with griffins on them. But often the school would set up speakers who would come from around the country to address our school assembly. And one day, all of us students had assembled to hear from a visiting boarding school principal from South Africa. And he was a charismatic man. I still remember to this day what he looked like. And he was a white South African. He had this very thick South African accent and Boris Johnson-like hair, but black. And it was the years right after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And he was there to talk to us about his experiences at the end of apartheid, the commission, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, and what he personally, as a principal of this school, had undergone. The forgiveness that was extended to the white South Africans, or some of them through this process, and the elite. And he came to a certain point, and then he said, simply, to describe what he had been through, and I remember so many years ago, but such great feeling came into his voice, and he said, I am black, in this thick South African accent, I am black. We didn't quite understand what he meant, but we knew how powerful it was, and he didn't have to say any more. The Lord, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abundant in loving kindness and in truth. Adonai, Adonai, arachum v'chanun, erech apayim v'rav chesed ve'emet. Creating kindness for 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, forgiving not only misdeeds done unintentionally, but also those done intentionally, and those when we truly desired not to act, we could not stop ourselves and did them anyways. And God cleanses, clears it all away, the wrong, the guilt, the resulting suffering, all of it. And we are purified, we are renewed. I always thought, thinking about his words, the principles, I am black, that they were the words of a man who was profoundly transformed, being swept up in a historical process that was far larger than his own person or that of his family or even of his society and friends, circles. And out of it he emerged as a man taking up in a redemptive wave and returned a new person, a different perception of self. And if the color of his skin could not change, and he could never really experience what it's like, but inside he had changed. And this is the power of forgiveness. You can take a white person and change your self-perception because South Africans' shame and guilt and pleas for forgiveness were accepted and received. Incredible. And it wasn't only lip service in this process, or an official statement, but it was a personal, intimate, and yet national process of truth and reconciliation, where you could face the other and speak and bear your feelings and share and be heard, and if needed, weep. Because we live in an unforgiving world. We know this. And so much of our world, if we make a mistake, we are finished, and there is no way back. In our careers, in our relationships with others, in matters of our dignity and reputation. Over a lifetime of experience, we've come to expect this. It is the law of nature. For every action there is a reaction, and compassion does not often enter into that calculation. So that when we encounter true forgiveness, it is redemptive. It transforms us. It propels us to new life. A story I saw a few months ago of a young German girl who went to travel to California. Germans love California. And she found work and a roommate, and her roommate was a over 90-year-old Holocaust survivor. And eventually they spoke about the Holocaust. And he said, "You are 2-3 generations removed. You should feel no guilt." And she told him that her grandfather had been in the war. And he said, "Do not carry any guilt." They had one of those beautiful stories of friendship. She was in her 20s, him in the twilight of his own life. I remember the scene of them on the roof, a moment of redemption and sweetness. But we all have stories, and every one of us carries guilt in some form or the other, and we wish to be absolved of it. And it is what this day is about, what we are doing here, because Judaism believes in that forgiveness. The world may be unforgiving, and in some cultures you cannot admit your guilt. It is a terrible loss of faith that follows you and that follows your family. It's better to not even acknowledge it. But we do acknowledge it. And you don't even have to whisper it only in the rabbi's ear. We believe in the possibility and in the power of forgiveness. And we have a whole day for it. We all gather together, and we do not eat and we do not drink. And it's a very serious but joyful day, coming after a week where we are inspired to ask for forgiveness and to give forgiveness with other human beings. Because on this day we do what the Mishnah says, we turn to the Holy One, the mikvah of Israel, the ritual bath of Israel, and we let all of that forgiveness begin to work within us. Because Judaism does not believe that we have to carry that guilt our whole lives. But that there is a way for each one of us, whatever it is that we have done, almost anything, to be absolved of it. And as a people, we are willing to extend forgiveness to other nations, except to Amalek. Amalek are those who are pure evil. The individuals, the peoples who have turned to evil and who attack children and the elderly when they are exhausted, as Amalek did to the Jews when they were leaving Egypt and they were a weary nation of slaves. And Haman from the Purim story, who plotted to kill all the Jews because one Jew had refused to bow down to him, was a descendant of Amalek. There are lines that we do not cross. But mistakes, we all make mistakes, every one of us, and that is not the end. And we believe that we can ask others for an understanding of our humanity. And we are to ask them 3 times for that understanding. And if they say no, Jewish law says it's their baggage and not ours. We are to see others in their humanity and to provide them with a process of returning back to relationship, an opening, even if they have wronged us. And this is in fact one of Judaism's gifts to the world. It is a path in teaching that our Christian friends and neighbors have also taken up in their own way, but it was our original contribution. In our 4,000-year-old Torah, our founders, the Torah goes to great length to show all of their mistakes. Down in Egypt, Abraham, who is the father of 3 billion people this day, he pretended that Sarah, his wife, was his sister to save his own life and left her vulnerable. And he did this twice, according to the book of Genesis. And Joseph's brothers, who were the future head of the 10 tribes, threw him in a pit out of spite and jealousy, but they found their way through it with great pain and suffering. And our tradition is also clear about what happens when forgiveness and truth and reconciliation do not occur. And one of the memorable stories in the Talmud is of 2 rabbis who are best of friends, who are study partners, chavruta. One of them, Reish Lakish, was a noted gladiator and bandit in a former life, but he was convinced by the other, Rabbi Yochanan, to use his strength to study Torah instead. And so Reish Lakish, the former gladiator, quickly rises to be one of the leading rabbis of the generation. And the two rabbis joyfully spar over disputes of Jewish law. And Reish Lakish marries Rabbi Yochanan's sister. And he turns from the ways of banditry to piousness and to the paths of Torah. Till one day, tells the Talmud, they were arguing over a matter of Jewish law, when different implements become ritually impure. And eventually they addressed the sword, and they argued bitterly back and forth, till suddenly Rabbi Yochanan, in the heat of the moment, said, well, you should know, a bandit knows his banditry. And Reish Lakish says, well, I was a master then, and I'm a master now. But what did you help me gain? And so Rabbi Yochanan retorts, you fool, I brought the Shekhinah, the divine presence, over you. And so they part bitterly. And the Talmud says, Reish Lakish leaves and does not return home. And eventually he dies. And Rabbi Yochanan is now all alone in the study hall, all alone. And all the other rabbis and leaders are trying to make him feel better. And so they keep finding him the smartest students, the Talmidei Chacham, to be and to study with them. But he is exasperated with all of them. And he says to them, you keep saying yes, yes to all of my points of Jewish law. But he, Reish Lakish, used to give me 25 objections to every one of my statements. And so dejected and guilty, he too is lost in his loneliness and in his pain. And the message of our tradition is that if we refuse to forgive, then eventually we are left alone. And that the pain of human conflict is a pain that can dull all of our life. We all make mistakes. Mahatma Gandhi, in his early years at the front of India's independence movement, was known to have completely taken himself out of the very movement that he gave his life and energy to when it quickly turned violent in its early years, and he was unable to control it. And he called it his Himalayan blunder. And he happily accepted a period of going to jail, a British jail, and ended the call for independence for several years as he himself reflected and recentered about that period. Because Rabbi Nachman of Breslov teaches, if you believe you can destroy, then there is a path forward. Then you must believe that you can also repair. And even in the story, maybe one of the most upsetting stories in the Torah, the story of Cain and Abel, the two sons of Adam, where Cain kills his brother Abel out of jealousy. And the sages teach that at first Cain is unremorseful. Am I my brother's keeper, he tells God, and God sharply asks him, I hear your brother's blood crying out from the earth, and Cain, he says, is now cursed to wander the lands in his guilt. And Cain then cries out, my life is finished. And so God hears him, even Cain, and he puts a special mark on his forehead, an ot, literally a letter, so they should not be killed by the other inhabitants of the primal world. The Hasidic teacher Shlomo Radamsk teaches, even there, God reconnected Cain, even Cain, to the letter in his letter in the Torah. We have a teaching, every one of us has a letter in the Torah that gives us life and that gives us vitality. God gave even Cain a path to life again. We make mistakes, grave mistakes. They're done by accident, they're done purposefully. We had hoped to avoid them, but we did them anyways. We can fix them. And much of the time, we can be forgiven. The most beautiful moment of a fixing of a relationship, of the power of forgiveness in the Torah, is when Joseph forgives his brothers. According to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, whose passing we mourn this year as one of our great teachers and leaders, Rabbi Sachs says this is when the Torah invented forgiveness and gave it to the world. A big claim. But Rabbi Sachs says, before then, there was forgiveness, but not to the full extent. Joseph does not merely appease his brothers. He doesn't allow them to live with their guilt, but he pardons them. He lets it all wipe away. He forgives them, and he wipes away their guilt. Because Joseph's brothers, this going back to the beginning, of their story had been jealous of him because he'd been their father's favorite and he'd had the love and the care and the gifts. And one day when they were far from home, they assaulted him, threw him in a pit, and then sold him into slavery to Egypt. But miracle of miracles, Joseph rises and becomes second in command of all of Egypt after Pharaoh himself. And when the brothers go down to Egypt, they do not recognize their long-lost brother because he's dressed as a powerful Egyptian lord. But he recognizes them. And he does not reveal who he is, but he makes them suffer for what they did to him. But then, around the end of the story, one of the climaxes of the Torah, when one of his brothers finally shows him a brave heart, suddenly Joseph could no longer hold back. And his tears and sobs, the Torah says, can be heard throughout the land of Egypt. And he draws his brothers near, and he tells them, he is their long-lost brother, Joseph. God made them throw him into the pit. They should not carry any guilt. God made them do it so that he could rise to the position that he's now in and save all of them. And the word forgiving is used for the first time in the Torah. And in the end, forgiveness becomes one of the most common tropes in the whole Torah. Again and again, during the 40 years in the desert, the children of Israel incur God's anger and wrath because of their rebellions, because of their losses of faith, because of them questioning Moses' leadership. But even in the worst of all of those cases, when God completely despairs of them ever entering the promised land and fulfilling their fate, and Moses argues for their very existence, God relents and says, Salachti kidvarecha, I have forgiven you as you have asked. Words that we repeat again and again on this day. Because to ask for forgiveness is easy, but to grant it is much more difficult. Because our hearts become hard, and we ignore the pleas of those who ask us for forgiveness. We brush them away. And we only see the negative, and we can only see the conflict and feel the pain of those decades of bad feelings. We've all known those experiences in our own lives. We've experienced it ourselves or witnessed it. The siblings who run a family business together and never talk again, usually because of money. All the many rivalries for love, for money. But if we do not give forgiveness, how can we expect it back? The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, in one of his seminal teachings says, God is our shadow. He follows what we do to other human beings. If we're kind to other human beings, God is kind to us. If we forgive other human beings, then God forgives us. So what is the nature of divine forgiveness? We see it in the story of the casting away of Yishmael that we read on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, right? Yishmael, Abraham's firstborn, older son, is a wild boy who would become an even wilder man. And he's rough with his younger brother Isaac to the point where Sarah and God ask Abraham to cast him away, and Abraham must relent. And when Yishmael is in the desert and he's all alone and his mother despairs, believes they're going to die, an angel appears and God tells her that he has seen the boy. He has seen the boy. And Rashi, the French commentator, explains, Ka'asher hu sham, as he is, where he is. To forgive is to see others as they are, in all of their weaknesses, in all of their vulnerability, even in all the parts of themselves that anger us, that even repel us, but to see them as they are, and to also see the parts of them that are beautiful, and to forgive, to change how we see them. The die had been cast for Yishmael, but God forgave because it wasn't a situation that was entirely his fault. And he was given a new destiny, not to be a father of a Jewish people, but a father of other peoples, also numerous and powerful. And this is our challenge. To sincerely forgive is to be willing to see the other, where they are, in all of their narrative and stories, all of their feelings, all of their difficulties, and our own too. And to acknowledge the brokenness of existence that led to the falling out. Just a few weeks ago, I was reading a cooking magazine that we receive, and it started with an article by the editor about her forgiving her mother and speaking to her for the first time in a decade, taking a flight over with the food that she was writing a recipe about, bringing it over and opening the door and seeing her for the first time in all those years and all those emotions washing over her. But then it passed. And I thought, incredible. Forgiveness is such a powerful part of our lives that even the cooking magazine is talking about it. But this is what we're doing here on Yom Kippur. We're working to strip ourselves of all those layers, all of the pains and mutual grievances, until we can actually see each other. And we do the same to see ourselves as we are, and to pray that the universe sees us as we are. And we go through all those lists. I have done this and I have done that. I have sinned this way and in that way, even if we do not remember doing it. To come to that place to be seen and to see with clarity as things are, devoid of all the extra stuff that we place there, and to give that chance to the power of forgiveness to transform us. And it's not easy. It really is not easy. And that's why forgiveness is considered a supernatural act that goes against nature itself. When we accept forgiveness, we're stretching ourselves and revealing our deep humanity. We're exchanging a heart of stone for a heart of flesh, as the prophets say, revealing the human being that is deeply within us. And again, our tradition and the Torah so obviously believe in it. And they teach that every 7 years, all debts in the times of the Torah were forgiven, wiped away. And every 49 years on Yom Kippur was a Jubilee year when the shofar was sounded and property rights returned to the original families that had been a portion of a piece of land by God in the Bible. So let us give each other another chance and sound that shofar of a new beginning. We're taught that God created the world with the attribute of judgment, but the world could not endure. So God brought in the attribute of mercy, and the world was balanced. The penultimate line at the very end of the book of prophets, from the minor prophet Malachi. As I remember Alan Peretz, who just talked to us, once noted, what a minor prophet, he only got a master's. But Malachi, the last prophet of Israel, said, "And behold, on that great and awesome day, at the end of times, when human growth and evolution will have fulfilled its slow but long journey through the ages, Elijah the prophet of blessed memory will come, and he will restore the hearts of parents for their children and of children for their parents." And Shabbat is a taste of that day. And Yom Kippur, Shabbat Shabbaton, the Sabbath of all Sabbaths, is an even greater taste of that day. A day to forgive, a day to harness that great power of forgiveness and transform our lives. So look at your family around you with Yom Kippur eyes, with eyes of forgiveness and asking and also giving. For each of us to find the faith and trust that no matter how deep the hurt has been, with Yom Kippur eyes, anything is possible. God will help, Elijah the prophet will help. Because the people who you are journeying through life with are often the hardest relationships to sort out and get right. Because they're so close and intimate, but they are the relationships that deserve our best efforts of forgiveness and renewal. The greatest haftarah of the whole year is this afternoon. And it's not a great prophetic vision about the future messianic age, but rather it's a story of a reluctant prophet, Jonah, who is sent to deliver a fire and brimstone prophecy to a city, Nineveh, that had fallen into very sinful ways. And Jonah does not want to take on this difficult task, but God appoints him to fulfill it nonetheless. And so Jonah tries to flee on a boat, but a divine winds cause the sea to storm. And Jonah tells the crew to push him into the sea, because it's him who's caused this divine displeasure. And so they do. And in the city, as we know, he is swallowed by a whale that transports him back to the shores of the city. because God needed him to fulfill his mission, and because this is his destiny, and also the destiny of Nineveh to hear his words. So Jonah does deliver his words to Nineveh, and the people are deeply touched, and they repent. And they put ashes on their head. From the ordinary man and woman on the street to the king himself, they all find that place of repentance and plead for divine forgiveness. And God responds. The all-merciful one forgives them all, every one of them. But Jonah does not. Next morning, a plant grows above the prophet's head, providing him with shade from the powerful rays of the sun. And it gives him relief for a while, but suddenly the plant withers and dies. Jonah is inconsolable. He's consumed by anger and self-pity, but also self-righteousness. How could God save this wicked people, but yet destroy the plant that was shading him? But God responds to him. You receive shade from the plant for a few short hours and are angry at its destruction. I have created and cared for all the people of Nineveh for many long years, and yet you would have me destroy them. A different perspective. Open your heart, have compassion, find forgiveness, find faith and trust. Why destroy? This is the message of Yonah to all of us on Yom Kippur. To bring in a different perspective, to find forgiveness within ourselves for others, and help bring that power of forgiveness into the world. And the very existence of the day of Yom Kippur itself arises out of another tragic family situation. In the Torah, the commandment to observe Yom Kippur comes as a result of the death of the sons of Aaron, Moses' brother. It begins with the words Acharei Mot, after the deaths. Aaron was the first high priest, and two of his sons, Nadav and Avihu, made a grave mistake on the day of the inauguration of the tabernacle, and they rushed into the tent of meeting with a strange fire, even an idolatrous fire, and they were killed. And as a result of that tragedy, God commanded the people of Israel, all of us through the ages, to keep Yom Kippur, thousands of years later, as a day of forgiveness for sins committed, as a means of purifying and cleansing the people, as a way to restore holiness. But obviously, Aaron had not transmitted something properly to his sons. What he must have felt on that day is unspeakable. As the Torah says, he remained completely silent. And so God ordained from then on that the high priest would also work for the good of his family too. And on Yom Kippur itself, as he conducted all of the intense rituals, before he asked for atonement for all of Israel and for all the priests, he first had to atone for himself and his family. And at the end of that long day, he was to return home. He had separated himself for 7 days before Yom Kippur to prepare for the holiday, the most important day of the year. But at the end of Yom Kippur, the high priest was to return home, his heart lighter, the burden of the past year cleared away, and to rejoice with his family in a festive meal. And this is how we want to come out of this most holy day, released of grudges and resentments, all of our petty grievances, and be free and be transformed. On Yom Kippur, we recite the 13 attributes over and over to remind ourselves how precious it is to be free of anger, how precious it is to be full of forgiveness, to be full of compassion and love. It can change our self-perception. It can transform nations and peoples. It can give us new life and wipe away loads that we've been carrying for decades, centuries. It can bridge the abyss between groups that have been wronged. And Yom Kippur, the Sabbath of all Sabbaths, Shabbat Shabbaton, is our chance to create that day of peace and harmony envisioned by prophets. A day to create some of that consciousness of forgiveness in our own hearts and minds. Every year we try to find that space and take it back into the world with us. Because we live in that unforgiving world where you make one mistake and you're finished. And your career, your relationships, your reputation, legacy can be all destroyed. And Judaism came to teach the world a different way, where you can ask for forgiveness and be forgiven and start anew. And this is our gift to the world. Making a mistake does not need to be the end. We can ask for a measure of understanding of our humanity, to give us another chance, in relationships with our families, our colleagues, with the world. And all we have to do is ask 3 times to forgive you. And all we have to do is forgive by the 3rd sincere attempt. And sometimes, despite a sincere request for forgiveness, a person cannot find it in his or her heart to forgive another. And in such cases, it is God who forgives, who wipes the wrong away. There is a saying, to err is human, to forgive is divine. Today is the day to let go of all of it, to find it in each one of our hearts, to find a new beginning. And if we can find that place, or many of those places, I urge you to, then we'll be able to eat our meal tonight in peace and with the joy of new life within. Chag Sameach, Good Yantiv, Gmar Tov. Before we turn to our Yizkor service, we have a video for you of Emma Rubinstein, who grew up at Har Zion and is the concert master of the Idaho Falls Symphony. To take us into the space of Yizkor, we'll be playing Nigun from Suite Hebraïque number 2 by Cyril Irving Glick.